Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special meeting of the Education and Neighborhoods Committee for July 21st, 2010. It is 3:37. My apologies for starting a little bit late. I'm joined by the Honorable Janice Hahn and the Honorable Dennis Zine. Thank you both for being here today. We'll be taking our general public comment after the discussion of the two agenda items today. So why don't we get started on agenda item number 1, Mr. Powell.
Item number 1 is a motion by Krikorian Hahn relative to the implementation of a checking account system for neighborhood councils.
This motion arose for a number of reasons, but in part out of the concerns that had been raised by the Controller's Office's audit, but also concerns that have been raised by the neighborhood councils themselves about creating a system by which they can pay for their expenses in a way that achieves both ease of use as well as accountability and cost effectiveness for the city. So I know that we have representatives here from the Controller's Office, from the Treasurer's Office, from Dunn, from the CAO and the CLA's office, and I'd like to ask them to come forward now to discuss the recommendations that we've been able to develop for the use of checking accounts, purchase cards, and the accountability and security issues that are involved with that.
Good afternoon,
Should we start with Mr. Kim?
Where would you like to start?
Well, why don't we go from right to left?
Okay. Bungwan Kim, still the General Manager, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment.
Congratulations.
Thank you. As you know, the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment has been charged with managing the funding program, which has had its ups and downs. Trying to reconcile the needs of a city financial management system with the needs of a volunteer-driven system is a challenge and a system that doesn't exist in the city before. I feel like we've made despite the staffing cutbacks, I feel like we've made some improvements, and we're continuing to make some process improvements to make it easier both for our department to administer the funding program as well as try to make it as easy as possible for neighborhood councils. We've been working very closely with the Controller's Office in terms of trying to streamline a lot of the procedures and policies in terms of making sure that public funds are used in a responsible and publicly accountable way. Neighborhood councils had 3 ways to pay bills. We eliminated the petty cash accounts about 5 months ago, largely because of staffing issues. We realized that it did present a lot of challenges for neighborhood councils who often spend a lot of out-of-pocket expenses for meetings and refreshments and those kinds of things. So what I did do was increase the purchase card maximum transaction limit to $2,500 per transaction. Recognizing that the city check writing system can often be cumbersome. We're also working with the controllers.
Sorry, Mr. Kim, but does that increase remain in effect now,
Yes,
or was that only through the end of the fiscal year?
Well, it was originally designed to be a short-term solution to the fact that we had to do a moratorium on demand warrants for the end of the fiscal year because we didn't have enough staff to both do year-end closing activities as well as keep up with the incoming demand warrants. So while originally it was, I had intended it to keep it just for that quarter, I think it would make sense to keep it for now to $2,500. With the condition that every neighborhood council is approving their P-card transactions on a monthly basis.
Okay, and so as of now, neighborhood councils retain the ability to charge up to $2,500 on the P-cards as of today?
That's
okay.
correct.
Okay, very good.
Cannot withdraw,
Sorry, I didn't.
but cannot withdraw cash.
Right, okay, go right ahead.
So the demand warrants have been opened up as of July 1st. We haven't had as much demand warrants as we projected. I suspect partly because neighborhood councils are relying more on the purchase card, so I think that has worked. And I think your council motion may address the petty cash issue in terms of our current setup. So a lot of the neighborhood councils have expressed problems in terms of does it make sense to process a demand warrant for a $25 reimbursement for refreshments? So what I would recommend, based on our ability to get the staffing that we need, and thanks to your leadership, we are working with the CAO and the council to restore some of the positions that were deleted from our budget. But dependent on the staffing that's available, I believe that we could restart a petty cash account based on an impressed account system. And what that would look like is that we would do an initial $500 to $1,000 maximum limit for a petty cash account. And this time around, we would make sure that the maximum is not exceeded. So basically, we would issue a check to the neighborhood council treasurer for that amount, a determined amount to be determined by the city council if you care to make that decision. And then every other month, we would allow them to replenish the account based on them submitting a petty cash voucher. So similar to the way city departments work, when you spend down all the funds, the only way that you can replenish the account is to bring back all the receipts that document that the amount that you've spent was for valid purchases. We would also establish pretty narrow guidelines for what the funds could be used for. I think in the past, when the petty cash fund existed, some neighborhood councils, not a lot, but some were using it as a third way to pay bills because they were saying that the demand warrants took too long to pay. So this time around, we would make sure that the policy was very clear that it would be for incidental expenses only. And I think that that may address some of the concerns that have been brought up about having to go through a city check writing process for the incidental expenses. So that would be my recommendation in terms of complementing our current funding program services for neighborhood councils.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bartels, thoughts from the Controller's Office.
Thank you for introducing me. I want to thank the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, actually, for working diligently with us these last several months on the various ways to continue to or expand upon the ease and accessibility for neighborhood councils to expend their funds while paying attention to protecting the taxpayers' funds in terms of accountability and transparency in those expenditures. I would echo most everything that Mr. Kim just put forward. We are supportive of all three tools, purchasing tools, if you will, that he just outlined, with demand warrants still being the most appropriate method for significant purchases. Certainly the significant purchases, leave it at that, and I appreciate that we think they've done a great job of streamlining working with us to streamline the approval process or the documentation process for demand warrants. But admittedly, they are a more lengthy process and procedure and not as flexible or not as expedient and timely to make. We would encourage...
Can you run
Sure.
through the process of demand warrants?
Sure. Actually, the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment has put together a fabulous little guide on their website that I brought with me as my little cheat sheet here for the type of documentation required. For a first-time vendor, there are certain, there are more cumbersome, you have to demonstrate that you have a vendor code and a business tax registration certificate in order to be paid by the city controller for any demand warrant check to be cut. So there are 4 boxes to check for a first-time vendor. But after that, depending on the nature of the transaction, you're being asked to produce an invoice, an original receipt. These are not necessarily, you have to produce all of them, but at least some verifiable form of demonstrating the payment. But it's not, be happy to, I only brought my copy.
And what's the timeline on when they get paid?
When we have sufficient documentation, we turn it around in just 2 days' time. 5? Okay. Well, when I ask, it's 2 days. So 5 days guaranteed. 2 days when we're expediting. Okay. So 5-day turnaround. The issue is typically documentation without at least one of the boxes being checked. Sure. Thanks. From their website. That's actually one of 2 pages of that document, broken into the categories of reimbursements. You'll see my notes on there, though. Those demand warrants can pay for all of those things with varying levels of documentation, but recognizing that that's not always easy for every type of payment, we are suggesting that the majority of payments could be transacted, or many of the payments that they do today could be transacted via P-card. The purchasing card with the limit suggested, the increased limit of $2,500, is able to control on a transactional basis the amount of money spent. It's readily accounted for. It's easy to use. But again, it doesn't meet all requirements. Some vendors, some people, certainly neighborhood council members aren't going to be able to receive reimbursement via a P-card. So for all those transactions that are of the miscellaneous or petty cash type, then we'd go to the third category and suggest that an impressed petty cash system, whether it be a checking account or an actual cash-based account, is for you to decide. It from the controller's perspective, it's not checking versus cash. That's perhaps a control and convenience issue, but the impressed system or methodology is important in as much as it does set a limit to be determined, so that the checks and balance on reconciliation or on how much money has been expended during any period of time. But see the check or petty cash impress system as the most timely, expedient way for certain types of payments and reimbursements. Any questions from? Sorry, my notes, I guess I didn't clarify. My notes on there were highlighting which areas P cards could be used and which checking or petty. I used the word petty cash on that sheet, but it could be checking.
So
I didn't mean to bring an exhibit. Sorry, it was really my cheat sheet.
John, please pick up milk.
It doesn't say.
Oh, no.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not on TV. Thank you, Ms. Hahn.
I'm interested to hear that from the controller's perspective, there isn't a significant accountability difference between an impressed checking account and an impressed petty cash system that actually deals with cash. I would have thought that there would be an extra level of paper trail if you actually have people writing checks even for those small expenses. Is it not? Is it just too small of an amount of money to be worried about, or?
I think I would, yes. I didn't phrase it quite that way, but what we are definitely talking about is a limited amount of money, nominal amounts of money relative to their entire funding scheme. So documentation would be required in either case to replenish the account. So whatever limit it was set at, whether it was cash, as some of our departments utilize a petty cash system, or checks. I think it's a matter of convenience for the user that they might find checking more convenient. But as far as control for us, when they hit the limit, we would expect the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to review the expenditures.
And you already have a model because other departments are already using cash.
Correct.
Petty cash. So, okay, good. All right.
Krista Binder with Assistant Treasurer. We've had some great working relationships with both BH and also the Controller's Office. We're a big proponent of the purchasing card because it provides the flexibility with the controls, to enable neighborhood councils to make purchases, but also limit the liability to the city. I think we're supportive of sort of the impressed concept, but there's a very big distinction between issuing a check that someone will go out and cash versus opening 90 to 100 checking accounts. I think when you go to the route of opening checking accounts, then there are going to be a lot of requirements relative to reconciling accounts on a monthly basis, providing check stock, who are the authorized signers. There's the potential for deposits to be made to the account that are not necessarily city funds. There could be commingling issues. I just think there's a lot of things to be explored if the checking account approach is taken. I think there's some concerns about using the city's tax ID on accounts. Treasury would have to be a co-signer. I mean, there's just a lot of things to be thought through, though we do understand the need for petty cash. And And I think at the time, we know there were issues with the purchasing card and withdrawing cash. We still feel that that could be an acceptable means of providing cash to the neighborhood councils with some additional controls. And we've actually communicated to the bank, U.S. Bank, who's our purchasing card holder, how some of those things could be worked out. And I know Stefan talked to them today, so he can kind of give you a little bit more detail on that as well.
Stefan Janskolek, Office of the Treasurer. I talked to U.S. Bank earlier today to get a little bit more information for the meeting, and there's a lot of flexibility built into the P-card program that we currently have. Right now, the way the program works is it's like a Visa card, and you can charge up to a set limit. Currently, the limit is set at $2,500. There's different ways to structure it depending on what the need may be. You can stay with a charge methodology. Another methodology is to pre-fund a certain amount quarterly, annually, and have a declining balance. A cash can also be a component of that. You can set the cash, you can set it at a certain limit, let's say $500. You can set that per quarter. You cannot take out more than $500 per quarter. Next quarter, you have another $500. Those are different ways, different controls you can put in. On top of that, what we're doing right now is you can control where a card can be used by assigning certain merchant codes. You can exclude liquor stores, but include home improvement stores, for example, and further fine-tune your controls that way. And those are largely in place already. So there's different ways that the P-card can be used very effectively. On top of that, it's all online. There's reporting availability. It's a very little known report that's real handy. It's called a declined transactions report. You can see where people tried to use them. Are they only using them at the home improvement store? Or did they go into the liquor store? Or did they try to pull out cash when they're not authorized? You can monitor and review it that way as well. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of controls you can build into it.
Okay. So it sounds like there's kind of a consensus developing that expanded use of the P cards provides greater ease of use for the neighborhood councils, a greater paper trail and accountability, and an ability to control the types of expenditures and where they would be made, and eliminates a lot of the need for the demand warrants, which are very taxing on personnel for the city, and are also creating a lot of backlog, which many neighborhood councils report is in part responsible for their having large rollover amounts that they have, expenditures that are in the queue that they haven't been paid for yet.
Well, I was also interested in the monitoring of this, online, which I think obviously addresses, your diminished staff. And I wouldn't think you would need extra staff to monitor these accounts. It seems like this is a more efficient, streamlined way to monitor the accounts. And I would think the current staff could do that.
I know that Mr. Zine is tight on time, and I know he has a strong interest in this particular issue. So why don't I give him a chance to ask some questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I had a pre-scheduled 4 o'clock meeting with the mayor's office. $2,500 maximum, is that a reasonable amount of money, or is it too much?
I'm not hearing a lot of concerns from neighborhood councils in terms of the dollar amount. I think that if we complement it with a streamlined demand check writing process, that we could probably stick with 2,500.
I'm thinking that might be too much. Not seeing what's been purchased in the past, because once you get your expensive items, your computers, et cetera, what kind of expenditures you're going to make for $2,500? That is a lot of money. So I'd be curious to see in the previous documents what type of purchases they're making there that would account to that. I mean, if you're going to have a meeting, you're going to have coffee and cake or whatever, it's not going to be close to $2,500. So I'm just thinking that might be on the high side versus, once they get established, then maybe we could fluctuate that. The other question I had, I made some notes on here. Additional staff. Dunn, treasurer, controller would need additional staff. Dunn, treasurer, and controller need additional staff to monitor connectivity. I don't know where you folks can get additional staff.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's the controller, the treasurer, or done. That's going to be a very difficult task to try and overcome. Now, you're looking puzzled. It says right here, treasurer and controller would need additional staff.
And
I'm not aware of a
and
request.
that came from Treasury really saying if you opened up 90 to 100 checking accounts, I think the administrative burden on the department would be extensive.
I'm sure it
The
would.
monitoring, the auditing, from Treasury alone, us also looking at the reconciliations on a monthly basis. It's very burdensome. I know it would
And
take
look
a
at
lot
those
of
numbers.
staff effort.
And
yeah.
you'll go blind looking at those numbers
Yeah.
because it's a taxing situation. I don't dispute that. It's just, I don't know where you're going to get the body that they're requested here.
Oh, yeah, no, I know, we're not going to.
And then financials to be brought to the meetings. It doesn't show the financial statements to be brought to the board meetings. When they have the neighborhood council meeting, that treasurer's report has to be, every time they have a meeting, whether it's once a month, where that financial, the treasurer reports where they are financially. You talk about the checks, background checks. Now, how extensive is that a check? Is it a check on the criminal record, a check on their financial status, the check if they ever file bankruptcy? Are they going to be bonded? I'm talking about the folks that are handling the money.
Right.
We should look into that if we're going to bond them, if we're doing, because it says extensive. The treasurer and the board members responsible for handling funds would need background checks.
And that, and that once again comes from Treasury. If we open up checking accounts, then there's cash in and out. There's no way to limit checking account balances typically.
Right. So we want to err on the side of caution.
So we want to be, because the city would be liable if things were overdrawn. So we want to build in controls if that's the direction that the council wants to go in. I think just to safeguard the city financially, we would need to build in some extra
No,
control.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, when you talk about background checks, you're talking about a criminal check, you're talking about a financial status, you're talking about, see if they can have a bond, the person bonded. And obviously, we're concerned because there's been some problems, and we want to make sure there aren't future problems. Dunn does not have a process to review or approve neighborhood council financial transactions. So if they don't have a process, that's another consideration. If we implement something, there's no process that you have to follow up, then that kind of falls through the air. Also free checking, pay for fees associated with checking accounts. If you're talking 90 at $45,000 apiece, plus the money that the city has invested, talks about fees associated with checking accounts. There's some place they'll give us a free checking account.
Okay, we were looking at about $2,000 a month and
And the
up.
fees? Why can't we get free checking accounts? I mean, I got a free checking account, and it's not because I'm the richest guy in the world, it's just because I shop around. And there are banks that'll give you a free checking account. So I think if we're talking $2,000, that's $24,000 a year.
Yeah, I
So
think,
we should look at the competition, and the banks that we give money to,
Right.
the treasurer,
Now we're talking.
they got billions of dollars. We should say, you know what,
Yeah.
give us a free checking account.
Yeah.
I could probably.
Give us 91 free checking.
Maybe.
91 free checking accounts. Also,
You can have a toaster.
let's see, training, okay, the training, you talk about, you don't have the process to train neighborhood councils on preparing the budget, financial policies. That has to be part of the process. If you don't have the resources, maybe the treasurer can take care of that.
Well, I have to admit, there's a great opportunity for the people sitting at this table to engage probably some of the good treasurers out there in the neighborhood councils. I've never talked to them. I would love to dialogue with them and the CP.
We can arrange for that.
And I
We
think
can
Without a
definitely
problem.
arrange for that.
But I think through that collaborative dialogue, because we're the financial experts, I want to be able to listen to what's wrong, if there's anything wrong with the process, how can we streamline it for them?
Exactly.
I think this is a great chance to hear from them and to find out what they want.
And there's
Because
some-
I agree completely. And what I'm going to suggest is, because I don't want you to be
Well, let me
late,
just
so
do
let,
more.
let you go ahead and finish your comments. And then just so you know, I think what we're going to do is continue
Okay.
the conclusion of this until next week. So why don't you get your concerns out, and then we
The other-
can work on exactly that.
The other question was, monies in the checking account shall not revert to the reserve fund of the city at the end of the fiscal year. I don't think it should say shall not revert. There might be a necessity to have that. So you say shall not means no way it should happen, to leave that door
Where
open.
are you reading that?
It's on
And the treasurer's comments.
Briefing notes, education.
Oh, no, actually, that
Page
is
2, near the bottom.
Yeah.
second part of the.
Where?
The second,
Oh, I see it, I
with
see
respect
it.
to establish a
I
checking
see it.
account, and then also interest bearing. If there's $25,000 or $45,000 in the account, they're not drawing a lot, maybe we could use some of that as an interest bearing account. I mean, there's an option. It's not like we have to pay $2,000 for them to manage the accounts. If they've got money in that account, the bank's going to be using that money. We should see what we can negotiate. And it's not only what bank you mentioned. There's a whole bunch of banks out there that would love to get business from us. And if we're giving them millions of dollars, then they may want to give something back. Not going to cost them anything. I just think it's part of negotiation we should do. Done indicates it will need additional staff to monitor the accounts on a daily basis. That's going to be another problem. So those are some of the issues. But one of the concerns, the big concern I have, when you talk about background checks, people have to obviously submit to it voluntarily because you can't do it without their consent. And I'm not so concerned about the criminal history, if they may have got tangled with the law one time or another, but I'm concerned about what's their FICO score, what's their ability, if they've ever filed bankruptcy, to avoid that temptation. I know when you want to become a police officer, they check that financial responsibility. If you've got bad financial record, you're not going to be a police officer. You're screened out, just because of the temptation, just to make it safe. But I have this other meeting I have to need to go to, but I will make sure that I assist you with getting this done. And I know there's just think 90 separate neighborhood councils citywide that you have to train. It's a huge task. But the disappearing man is here again, so congratulations.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Council.
Zine.
Thank you.
The now disappearing man,
Oh, the
Mr.
disappearing-
Zine. Thank you for those comments. And what I think I would like to propose is that we have exactly the kind of conversation you suggest over the course of the next week. We continue this matter until the regular meeting so that all of you have an opportunity to discuss with our staff, working out some more of those details that you've discussed. Yes, Ms. Hahn.
Yes, I was just curious to know, I know reading this, it says in 2004, the City Council adopted a Neighborhood Council donation ordinance where it allowed the city treasurer to establish checking accounts for neighborhood councils under the city's existing bank contract. They were never implemented, right? But what was our thinking then in 2004? How were we thinking of doing this under the city's existing bank contract?
I think we were going to, leverage at our bank at the time, which was Bank of America, which is no longer, it's now Wells Fargo, to establish a structure with them that had the neighborhood council accounts rolling up to sort of a master account. Obviously, there are benefits to having funds on deposits. We do get, instead of interest, we get earnings credit. So being in Treasury, we would want to take advantage of the idle cash, obviously. And then, but we really needed to go further with the department in terms of what is the process for managing this and reconciling this, and who's authorized it, and it never got that far. So we are a strong proponent of the purchasing card. The more you spend on a purchasing card, the bigger our rebate is. We're in Treasury's mindset. We're always thinking about
So that's your
generating
preferred
money.
method.
I think it provides the flexibility. There is the ability to have the cash component, which we understand is a challenge for neighborhood councils for the incidental purchases. And it provides really robust reporting. It enables the administrator to raise and lower limits if a neighborhood council needed a higher limit. Let's say
So
they
you're
needed a
basically
5,000
saying
purchase.
you'd rather do that than you're
I just think
proposing
the
that as opposed to a
administrative
checking account.
Yeah,
Right.
that would be our recommendation.
Right, and there's a lot to work out, I'm sure. I would say, just off the hand, I kind of disagree with Dennis that the treasurer would have to provide their FICO score. Again, we got a group of volunteers out there. I think that's going a little bit too far. I think everybody has gone through their life and had a good FICA, bad FICA, and I just don't think that's information that we need to get from volunteers out there. So I would disagree with that.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think while his concern is well taken, the way we deal with that concern is by having accountability systems in place so that we don't need to worry about what the person's background is, because we will have sufficient safeguards in place to prevent or discourage any kind of temptation of wrongdoing. And that's our job. That's not up to our being able to trust in the
Right.
in the particular treasurers.
Right. I haven't seen the city council members' FICO scores, so, I don't know who I'm serving with. Okay.
All right. Anything else, Ms. Hahn? Okay, thank you all very much. I think this is a good architecture for us to build on. Let's plan to get together in the coming week, and then by next week, I hope we'll be able to have a well-refined policy on this area. In
Do you
this
like
area.
your-
So,
Thank you.
so we'll continue this until next week.
I pulled it off the web, so thank
Oh,
you.
right up at your
Thanks for
notes.
operating,
Thank you.
as long as it doesn't have my shopping list on it.
Oh, but we will, but yes, before we close this matter, we do have one card on item 1. That's Dr. Wiseman. Dr. Wiseman.
What?
I think that's the heart of this problem, and several others that are about to come before you.
Wait till you get to the mic.
Yeah.
There you go.
Now, can I start?
Yes.
Anxiety has always been fun. Anyway, I heard the lady from the Treasury say she hadn't talked to the neighborhood council people. You people make $200,000 a year, and for 200 hours a year, that's $50 an hour. What are you playing games here with $10, $20, $50,000 worth? That's nonsense. Delegate somebody with financial abilities in your offices. Get to the neighborhood councils and ask them, for crying out loud. Don't ask Mr. Kim, who's clearly shown that he cannot handle this with 62 people when he started, or with 4 people now. The P cards, yes, have a lot of nice features to them. They've never been fully utilized and certainly could be. I'll cut my comment short just to say that this was a travesty that I just witnessed here, and it was a waste of everybody's time. This is not something you need to be all that concerned about, but you do need to be concerned that the neighborhood councils have the ability to continue their actions and that their financial dealings can continue, and that I can go to the store and bring some cookies and drinks to my meeting tomorrow night so that we can have a little bit of refreshments and get a quick payback for it. Thank you for hearing me.
Okay, thank you. In fairness, that is our job. Our job is to create the policy that will make that happen, and it's not the treasurer's job. It's my job and the council's job. So, and we'll continue to work on making that better. So, thank you. That brings us to item number 2. Mr. Powell.
Item number 2 is the CAO report in response to a motion of Krikorian Koretz relative to a proposal to continue operating the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment as a standalone department for up to 6 months while the council and the mayor develop a new organizational structure for DUN.
Just for the record, this item was also referred to Budget and Finance, but because it came in so late, I didn't find out until after the agenda was passed.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Wilson Poon with the CAO's office. Item 2 is a report from our office with a series of recommendations to restore a couple of resources to allow DUN to operate as a standalone department. Just a couple of brief background, I guess. The mayor introduced an ordinance to consolidate or transfer the powers and duties of DUN to CDD under the authority granted to him under Charter Section 514. At the same time, he submitted a budget that proposed to eliminate 25 of DUN's 43 positions and transfer the remaining 18 positions to CDD. Council amended the mayor's proposed budget by transferring back the 18 positions to DUN and transferring back 3 months of funding for salaries as well. Council later disapproved the ordinance and instructed our office to report back with what the resources would be required to operate DUN as a standalone department. As I mentioned earlier, the adopted budget provides DUN with 18 positions and 3 months funding. The remaining 9 months of funding is in CDD's operating budget, along with all the operating expense funding as well. Recommendations 1 and 3 in our report is recommending that we transfer all the remaining funds from CDD back to DUN since the ordinance was not approved. And that's a total of $1.3 million. There are some contractual obligations. There's some operating expenses that the department needs to pay on July 1st. So until these recommendations are approved, we have advised DUN to transfer the monies necessary through the provisions in Charter Section 342, which state that the mayor can authorize transfers between departments and funds of up to $50,000. Over the last several weeks, our office met with Dunn. We conducted a site visit. We interviewed Dunn employees to determine, to assess, I guess, the workload issues, and also to determine what resources would be required for the department to operate as a standalone department. So we worked with Dunn, we looked at some numbers, and we determined that the current resources in the budget were not sufficient. And Dunn had suggested 8 additional positions. I can go through these positions really briefly if you want.
Please.
The first position is the Senior Management Analyst 2 position. This position will basically assist the general manager in the daily operations of the department. This position will also oversee the administration of the funding program, and this position will also oversee the administrative functions of the department, which include developing the department's annual budget, all personnel matters, and all purchasing issues as well. The work was previously done by a assistant general manager who had retired through ERIP, and we hired her back on a 40-day appointment, and a senior management analyst 2. The second position is the management analyst 2 position. This position will administer and prepare contracts and office leases for the neighborhood councils. This work is currently not being performed. The next positions are the 2 accounting clerks, and these would be for the neighborhood council funding program. These employees would process and review demand warrants and conduct quarterly audits. Currently, the quarterly audit function is not being performed. The demand warrants are still being processed. Dunn has reassigned some of the field staff to help them review some of these demand warrants. So we think that the 2 accounting clerks would provide them with the resources to also, there's also, I think, a backlog, I believe, in the demand warrants and the quarterly audit. So these 2 employees will help them address that issue.
Did anything that you heard in our previous discussion on item 1 cause you to reassess the need for 2 accounting clerks, or do you think that would the differences in our policy choices on whether we enlarge the P card options and so on would be too minimal to impact whether we need 2 full-time equivalents?
Yeah, I mean, when we sat down with the department, this was before the discussions on the P card issues came up. So at that time, 2 accounting clerks was what they had indicated. With the additional workload, I can probably say, yeah, we would probably need additional accounting staff if we did go to the MPRES system.
Okay.
The department also requested 3 neighborhood empowerment analysts. These would provide support to neighborhood councils, such as attending meetings, providing training, answering questions, providing outreach, certifications, so forth. Currently, the department is only servicing basically the low-functioning neighborhood councils, those that need assistance. They've kind of categorized neighborhood councils as low, medium, and high-functioning. And it's based on availability right now. So whoever's available, and right now they're currently not being able to service the medium and high-functioning neighborhood councils. So these additional positions will allow them to address that issue. And the last position they've requested is the Systems Analyst 2 position. This position will maintain the department's website and its servers, provide technical support, write softwares and programs to just kind of streamline some of the processes of the department. Currently, previously they had 3 systems positions. Now they're down to 1. So this one position, which I have heard the employees actually, I think, transferring out at the end of the month. After the end of the month, they won't have any system support. So the next thing we did was we looked at what was available funding. Given the city's current fiscal crisis, we looked at options to provide additional funding without causing any burden on the city's general fund. We identified $243,000 in funds that were budgeted in CDD's budget, which can be reprogrammed to support the cost of 5 of the 8 additional positions. $200 of that came from CEDs, what we budgeted for GASP services, General Administrative Support Personnel Services. As you recall, CDD is a grant-funded department, so any time or any expenses they incur supporting neighborhood council activities is an eligible grant expenditure, and the general fund would have to reimburse those granting agencies for those costs. So in the budget, we appropriated $200,000 for that purpose. And since the department is no longer going to CDD, we can reprogram that for additional salary dollars. We also sat down with the department. We looked at historical expenditure data, and we determined that $43,000 from the printing and binding and their office and administrative expense accounts could be reprogrammed as well for additional salaries. We also looked at other potential funding options. We looked at whether or not we could relocate the 18 employees to another city-owned office space and maybe reprogram the money we budget for office space costs. But the lease agreement, the language in the lease agreement prohibits us from doing that. So that was not an option. And I guess just to conclude, the recommendations in our report basically have identified $243,000 available funds. We're recommending that these funds be reprogrammed and 5 additional resolution authorities be authorized for the department to operate as a standalone department. There definitely will be challenges in staffing these positions and filling these positions with managed hiring and with the city's current budget crisis. So,
to sum that up, we can achieve implementation of a standalone done, enhance their personnel by 5 positions, and do that with these recommendations in a cost-neutral way.
Correct.
So in order to meet the full need for all 8 positions, we'd have to identify an additional $150,000 or so in funding from some other source.
Correct.
Mr. Kim, if I could ask you to come forward, please, and hear your thoughts about these recommendations, whether you agree generally with what you've heard. What are the impacts of having 5 additional positions as opposed to 8? If you could touch upon those, please.
Sure. Bongwan Kim, Neighborhood Empowerment. I'm generally very comfortable with the CAO's report. Understanding the unprecedented fiscal crisis, we will be a part of the team and try to get by and do what we need to do in terms of supporting the neighborhood councils with the 5 staff. Basically, the 5 positions are largely administrative and infrastructure support positions. In order of priority would be the senior MA2, the management analyst 2, the 2 accounting clerks to help with the funding program. The systems analyst position, we currently have the position authority for, I believe, but that going through the managed hiring process does present a challenge. So it's not a sure bet that we'll be able to fill these positions. That's a concern of mine, given the hiring freeze. We're going to have to list all the services that are going to have to be suspended until we can bring some bodies back into the department. We're preparing a list now with the staff, make it public at some point when we're clear about what services we'll be able to offer and which ones will have to be suspended. But functionally, our website becomes a very important tool as we go to a much leaner staff, and that's actually the direction, a strategic direction that the department will be going, is a lot more reliance on the web. It doesn't fully address the needs of LA's constituency, obviously. Not everybody uses the internet, but for the majority of board members, we feel like investing as much of the educational and information resource needs of neighborhood councils through the website. So the systems analyst position becomes very key because, as Wilson mentioned, our current single systems analyst is leaving for another department in 2 weeks, and we will not be able to do anything with our website until we can replace that position. But overall, I feel like this will bring us back to operability.
Okay. Now, neighborhood council funding is a little different under the charter in that we have to plan a full fiscal year ahead and provide some budget for neighborhood councils for the subsequent fiscal year. So there's already $140,000 budgeted for 2011, 2012 if we're done. Is it feasible to reprogram a significant portion of that funding and utilize that in the current fiscal year to help meet some of the need for those additional positions? Because it seems a pretty arbitrary number, 140,000. I mean, that clearly is not a sufficient budget to fund the department, but we put it in there. It's there. Those funds are available, and by coincidence, it happens to be almost the amount of money that we need to fund those additional positions. So is that, would that be a feasible approach?
That
Were you
would.
looking for just now?
His boss.
Looking for help, reinforcement.
And here comes the bus. There she goes.
Terry Sauer, CAO's office. In terms of the 140,000, that basically equates, it's a placeholder for the next year. It basically equates to the general manager's salary. We've had some discussions with the city attorney's office on this issue. At this point, we're not really comfortable recommending it because there is the spirit of the charter and the spirit of setting the funds aside, and there is some concern that if we diminish the money, one, we'll have to find those funds to allocate next year.
Granted.
Again, the decision to use those funds would be a policy decision of the council. We were not comfortable with that recommendation, and that's why we didn't include it, because there could be unintended consequences with the use of those funds. And so, to be quite honest, we took a very conservative approach to the funding recommendations in our report.
As you should, and I appreciate that. But it is a placeholder. I think everyone can agree that it is an arbitrary amount of money that's set aside to meet the requirements of the charter, but that there's nothing in the charter that says what that number should be. So it could be. Well, I don't want to sit here and guess what it could be, but
Again,
some portion of that could be.
A change to whatever that number. This practice is somewhat consistent with what we do with the ethics department because there's a similar requirement, and the general manager's an amount equivalent to the general manager's salary is set aside. Again, if there's a change or if the council wishes to change it, that certainly is a policy decision. And, in terms of what that change would look like, I would defer to the city attorney for additional guidance in council.
Well, we can save that component for another day, but I'm very comfortable with these recommendations. I think it makes it's a relief to know that we will be able, at least in a skeleton way, to be able to move forward without imposing additional burdens on the general fund, and that's a relief to know. Ms. Hunt, did you have anything?
Yeah, well, I was just kind of a big picture question to the general manager. Okay, you're back to a standalone department, 6 months. You had 43 employees, then you went down to 18. So even if you get 5, that's 23. In the next 6 months, maybe you could just tell me what's your mission for the department in the next 6 months? What's the priorities? How do you possibly expect to, empower neighborhood councils with a very limited staff and limited budget?
Well, that's a really easy question to answer. Let me see. Well, 6 months ago, when it became apparent that we would be going through reductions, we did some strategic planning with the staff and with neighborhood councils. You may be aware that I brought it before the committee's attention. About 8 months ago, we did a survey of about 500 neighborhood council members that responded, and they identified four major areas of services that were most important for them as board members, and that was education and training. The second one was outreach and marketing in terms of getting the word out to the city that neighborhood councils are open and public and everybody needs to participate, because participation is an issue with neighborhood councils. Thirdly,
Under education and training, what were they referring to?
everything from how to run an effective meeting, because running public meetings is a foreign concept for a lot of people. So what is the Brown Act? What is conflict of interest? Basically, what is it to be a neighborhood-based policy advisor to the city? It's a heavy obligation with lots of rules, and there's city attorney there, and there are city council with a lot of powerful figures. So it can be very intimidating, and what I hear from a lot of newcomers is, I got elected, and I had no idea what I got involved in.
Right, okay.
And so, obviously, education is the number one priority. About 25% of the survey respondents said that was the most important. So that becomes a key.
Okay, then outreach and marketing.
Outreach and marketing, and then thirdly was a kind of facilitative role between city government and neighborhood councils. So in effect, in some ways, we're kind of a matchmaker between identifying what the needs and interests of neighborhood councils are with different aspects of city government. So some may need some help with facilitating emergency preparedness services, for example. And many city departments, frankly, have a difficult time understanding 91 neighborhood councils. And they come to us and they say, what is the neighborhood council and how do we work with this one versus that one? And, one general manager going to 91 neighborhood council meetings is impossible.
Really, they're not still asking the question, what is a neighborhood council?
No, but how do they work with them is probably more of a common question that I get from city departments. And there are about 5 or 6 that neighborhood councils have the most interest in general. So a facilitative role there. And then the fourth would be assistant guidance with compliance and legal issues. So, that goes back to the, a lot of bureaucracy is involved in being a neighborhood council board member. So we try to make that, those resources available as possible. So
how are you going to do that, these 4 things?
Right.
And plus, these are just, like you said, just what neighborhood councils are wanting.
Right.
What's your plan on
And-
servicing them?
And it's also with the observation, as I've been in this position for 3 years, that neighborhood councils are growing, and many are able to function on their own. And some of them, the more sophisticated ones, say we just want the funding program to work. And we may call the city attorney when we've got issues, but for the most part, they don't need us, and that's fine. We think there's a baseline need for every neighborhood council board member to be educated. The ethics test is a state law. We have less than 50% of neighborhood council board members who have completed the ethics test. My commission is looking at that and seeing if there are some policies that could encourage more neighborhood council board members to meet the law. And so my concern going forward is with lower income communities. There are a number of neighborhood council boards in the recent city clerk elections where nobody ran for office on a board seat. And so the last thing that I would want to see in my leadership position is for the lower income communities not be able to take advantage of the influence and the potential connections that they can have with city government. So our staff resources are prioritized in terms of addressing the lower income needs, lower income communities, in terms of sending our staff out to the evening meetings. As you know, when we were more fully staffed, we were sending on a regular basis our staff who were kind of on-site consultants who could, on the spot, answer some questions around Brown Act or conflict of interest or how the funding program. That has had to be eliminated. So what we did was establish a helpline where all our staff are manning the phones during the work hours and taking all the questions. We're entering it into a database. So the ability to kind of our department to offer a more transparent resource. My idea is to take this database and then make it public. So that much like you get a Wikipedia, I don't know if you've used that, but it's a kind of user's
I just go in and edit
information
my
base.
name all the time.
It's kind of a user-developed information base. And based on frequently asked questions. You know, a lot of the questions that we get are common.
Right.
You know, there's a pattern. So our idea is as we start to enter this information, then we can start compiling a more user-friendly resource and then make it more self-serve. The policy needs for the neighborhood council system continue. So staffing the commission becomes a very important function, because the commission has to be provided with good information, good analysis, good recommendations. Part of that involves going out to the neighborhood councils and asking their opinions. The commission feels very strongly that we have to go out to neighborhood councils and get their opinions always before the commission takes any policy decisions. So that becomes a staff-consuming function. The funding program is obviously very important. It was a very broken system, but I think we're making some progress. With the participation of the Controller's Office and the Treasurer's Office, I think we're really able to identify some efficiencies and streamline as much as possible so that we're doing, in that case, we are doing more with less. That's one of the few instances that I think it's possible.
Any new neighborhood councils out there that need to be on
We
the horizon?
currently have 5 in the pipeline.
Really?
Yes. And that presents a challenge in these
Yeah.
fiscal times because we haven't budgeted for those.
Because the certification is a,
Yes, Northridge South certification was approved, and there's Westwood.
$1,000 for each.
Right. And then the councilman, the committee chair, is taking the leadership to conduct a number of town hall meetings, and he wants to hear, for the council purposes, what is the future structure of the neighborhood council system. When I first started this job, it made sense to look at something on a regional basis. And I think that I would support something like that, but then my question would be, how would the city support the development of a regional based kind of service function that could help complement what we have now? So that's a question that I don't know the answer to. I think the councilman is going to hear from neighborhood councils, and he's receiving a number of proposals, and I've been talking with neighborhood councils too. So that's a question that obviously has some resource implications.
are we still planning to put together a Congress
There,
this year or next year?
we've been on hold right now.
Yeah.
And we're in discussions with Councilman Krikorian in terms of seeing if we can do a town hall meeting around the question of what is the future of the neighborhood council system, and I couldn't think of a better question for an annual Congress than that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you
Where
for asking.
where in areas where you have persistent lack of participation, part of the answer might be that we have to do a better outreach. But I think there are still, no matter what you do, there are going to be some areas where it's going to be harder than others to get people to get engaged and involved, especially as it's divided up now among 91 different neighborhoods. Is it feasible to consider consolidation or in other ways utilize the number of activists that you have maybe to cover a broader area rather than to try to find new activists who so far aren't raising their hand to volunteer? Is that something that's been considered?
It hasn't been considered because I think we're still receiving applications for new neighborhood councils to be certified. It may make some sense. The smallest neighborhood council that we have, there are only 4 that are under the 20,000 population threshold, and the largest is 145,000. So there isn't a whole lot of consistency in terms of size. And outreach, a clearer outreach policy would be helpful. My commission is looking at that. And as much as we can do to, and that's what I was trying to do before our budget cuts took place, is a marketing campaign to, and we use the mantra "Empower LA." That's our new logo and brand, is to really get the word out there, because I talk to so many board members who say their relationship with city government has been transformed as a result of their experience with the board. And they're going to talk to their friends, and they're going to talk to other people. Unfortunately, it's not happening as much, or it's not happening, I think, in many diverse communities as much as I would like to see. But I think part of this regionalization of the neighborhood councils may be there's some possibilities there and opportunities to look at how do we address the lack of participation both on the outreach and marketing side and drawing people in, as well as not creating so many empty board seats.
Very good.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one card on item number 2. Dr. Wiseman.
Janice, how long have we been at this? 5 years?
Longer than that.
How many times have we heard the same thing? Are we going to listen to it again, or are we going to look for something new? This is still an experiment, my lady, and I'll turn the other
No,
cheek
it's not.
any time you want. There you go. She once slapped me for saying that. She promised she would. She kept her promise, and I have the greatest respect for her on that regard. Over and over again, neighborhood council people have gone to Dunn and asked to participate, to advise, to help develop things. The treasurers in the previous discussion have been trying to do that with Dunn. The Bylaws Committee, which will have a major meeting of the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils, and hopefully the Harbor Alliance will be doing it soon, and the West Los Angeles Alliance and several other alliances are going to go through this Bylaws Task Force report, which has been subverted and torpedoed by Dunn. We've done this over and over again. Now, do you think that my life has been transformed because of Dunn? You think they have the capacity to do that? I don't think so. I think we're seeing a fallacious idea here. The idea is that Dunn can be a city-based organization doing the city's needs, but not doing the needs of the neighborhood councils. The neighborhood councils are more than ready. They're more than capable of managing their own affairs. As you know, I communicate with about 300 of the key people in the neighborhood council on a regular basis. The budget advocates have been trying to bring forward all kinds of ideas. The ideas are rebuffed, they're not picked up, they're not carried out, and we then end up back talking the same story over and over and over again. Why I'm still with it, I'm not quite sure.
I know.
Why many people turn around and leave is obvious. But I still think that this system has great merit. It is one of the most profound and one of the most noble experiments in democracy that I've ever heard of in our country's history, and I'm thoroughly committed to seeing it succeed. I see it failing over and over again, mainly because the neighborhood council people themselves are not involved in the solutions, completely involved in the solutions. How many times do I have to volunteer? All of my friends, Ginger, Damon sitting in the audience with me, listening to what you're saying. We're at your service. You're
Thank
at our service, too, and that's the way it should be.
Absolutely. Very well said, Dr. Wiseman. Thank you.
Very well said.
I am comfortable with recommending these recommendations to the council. Ms. Hahn, unless you have any objection.
I would second your comfortableness.
My only question is, as a technical matter, is approving this report sufficient to advance the matter with everything that we need to implement it to council, or are there additional motions beyond what we have before us that would be required? Approval of the report is sufficient?
My only question would be if it had to go to Budget and Finance, because it does involve.
Question. Yes, of course.
And as it relates to the department with the issue with managed hiring, we will work with the department to expedite or to facilitate the submission of their request to manage hiring once it's approved by council. So to the extent that you can start working on your request, and then we'll submit it to the Managed Hiring Committee, with our recommendations to get that piece separate and apart. We'll work with them.
Okay, then. just-
What do we think the timeline is on the managed hiring if all goes smoothly?
Managed hiring operates on
I know.
its own timeline, so we will work with, to the extent that we can, we will
Who's
work.
on that managed hiring committee?
CAO, CLA, and mayor, so we will work with our staff with the three representatives, so we will work with them to move this forward. And
Right.
if there are questions, we'll do our best to address them so that it can get approved.
Maybe even a letter from the chair of this committee to the managed hiring committee, I think would be appropriate, and I would
Excellent
like to
idea.
see you do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good suggestion. Be happy to do that.
I would echo the CAO's comments about the Managed Hiring Committee. I've been hearing that it's extremely difficult to getting authority from the Managed Hiring Committee to refill vacant positions.
Well, they haven't
and,
heard from Paul Krikorian yet.
And so anything that you could do
Thank you for
to
putting it
help
on my shoulders.
help grease the wheels
Yeah.
of that mysterious committee
Yeah.
would extremely helpful. I think there's a couple of strikes going for us as a city department in terms of trying to attract the kind of talent that we would need. One is that we're on a furlough. Why would a person coming from a special funded position who's not on furlough come to our department and have more stress and more extra work days? And the fact that we're a smaller department is a disincentive for a lot of city employees because we don't have the promotional opportunities. So we tend to attract a very small sliver of the city employee family. So anything that you could do to help expedite this process would be very helpful.
And because it's one of the most noble experiments in democracy that this country has ever seen.
Correct.
So the opportunity to
Who
work
wouldn't wanna
with
come
neighborhood
work
councils
here?
alone should be
Who
motivation
wouldn't want to be a
enough.
part of this
Dr. Wiseman?
movement?
All right. Well, that will be, the recommendation of this committee then will be to approve the report. If there are any additional implementing motions that are necessary in the process, please let me know. We'll expedite those and make that happen.
And an official request. that
And
you
we
send
will,
that.
we will make we will write such a
Formal
letter.
letter.
Yeah, to
Okay.
expedite managed hiring. Yes, thank you very much. Finally, Dr. Wiseman, you are our only public comment. If you'd like to take one more shot at the mic, you're welcome to it.
I guess I said it a moment ago. I don't need to reiterate it.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
But it was
It's-
good.
It's the neighborhood councils that we're concerned with here, with all respect to the city, and I think and hope that you realize I have great respect for the city. The neighborhood councils need more support. They need more encouragement. They need more involvement. They can do a lot of it themselves, and they've been ready and waiting to do it. I think if your committee begins to have town halls in which a shift in the nature of done toward support and advocacy on behalf of the neighborhood councils is one of the outcomes of the town halls you're about to propose, we're going to see a whole different situation, and we're going to see a much better city. A city which maybe those people who've been standing on the wayside and who don't think it's worth getting involved and who don't like government and who don't like politics can find out it isn't such a terrible animal after all. I hope so. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. I think if there's nothing further, no further public comment, we're adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Great job.
Yeah, it was a meeting.
Great job.